Welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition, where we keep you up to date with everything going on in the ColdFusion community. We'll share the latest news on events, releases to engines, frameworks, libraries, and tools, as well as spotlighting quality content from the community. Welcome back to another Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition, and I said welcome back because you should all be coming back every week.
You know, I didn't think people ever left, Gavin. I thought when we go offline, they just sit just staring at YouTube waiting for us to come back.
Well, I know Scott does, because he was here first, so.
It's like a dog at the front door when his owner's home. Just like, is he back yet? Is he back yet?
Yep, exactly. Okay, for those who don't know, I'm joined today by Brad Wood, software consultant for Auto Solutions, and I'm Gavin Pickin. I'm also a software consultant. Unfortunately. Don't worry, Brad. We get some time off soon, maybe, sort of. But
I guess get some special stuff coming up. Is Santa Claus going to be on?
Maybe.
Or as Tigger says, Sandy Claus.
Yeah. Well, first, let's thank our sponsor, Auto Solutions. Without them, we wouldn't be able to make this podcast. So thank you, Autos. One way you can say thank you back to Auto Solutions is supporting some of our products. And one of them is CFCasts, which releases new, free, and paid content every week. And right now, we've actually got 2 series being released. The ColdBox Zero to Hero training series that I trained a lot of people on this year. We made that a video series and is on the site. And also we have 12 modules of ForgeBox Christmas being released right now. So we like to do this little series every year. Usually it's a blog series, but this time we've got a video. So you can check that out on cfcast.com. And again,
we've gone crazy.
Free and paid content. Yep. And then we also have our Patreon supporters that now are providing 61% of the funding for this podcast. So, yep, thanks to an up by John Wilson. He upped his plan, and now we're over the 60% mark, which I think this might be the highest we've actually been at any point. So
it's the highest I can recall.
Yep. So we have 33 patrons right now providing 61% of the funding. And you can find out more at patreon.com/autosolutions. But thank you guys, and we'll thank you more at the end of the show. Okay, so now we can talk about a little news.
I think Gavin's actually prepared a little song he's going to sing in thanks. Is that correct?
You're the musical one.
Oh, well, I do have my guitar over here next to me, so see what I can work on.
Yeah, Brad Wood is similar to plywood, Scott asked. Well, he does have a lot of layers, and he's pretty dense.
Like ogres and onions.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so some podcast news for you. As we mentioned, there might be a special guest for our next episode. December 22nd, our 84th episode, our Christmas edition this year, has a mystery guest. And I'm not sure when we'll tell you, if we'll tell you, or if you just have to shop and see who it is. But it's someone in the community, someone you know, and it's not someone who's been on this podcast before. So that rules out a few people. So we're going to mix it up. We don't have to just do special guests at Christmas time. We can do special guests other times too, but we want to give you a little Christmas cheer. I know last year everyone really liked Ben Adele coming on and doing that, so, but I'll give you a hint, it's not Ben this year, it's someone else.
Who's it going to be?
Yeah, I know they got a lot of big shoes to live up to, big weights to carry.
I see what you did there.
I know, sorry, I'm a little crazy today.
For those of you who don't know, Ben Adele used to always be big into working out and had big old guns. So
yeah, he does. On his Twitter feed, he has some posts of him doing deadlifts and stuff. The funny thing is, he doesn't wear shoes when he does it. So
I've never noticed that.
Yeah. Well, so you don't even read his tweets unless they're software related, I guess.
I'm
not a true fan, Brad.
I only follow keywords on Twitter. I use Hootsuite, and I have columns for each keyword. And if you tweet it, I don't see it unless it has ColdFusion, Lucy, CFML, TestBox, ColdBox, CommandBox. One of those words. If it doesn't have that, I don't see it. So, yeah. So I'll see tweets of Ben, but only if it mentions something I care about.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I don't pay any attention to him. Sorry. Not sorry.
Yeah. Well, speaking about things we care about, dates have been a big thing lately. Scott Steinshouer. Well, not going on dates, we can't do that, but date comparisons. So compared to our old dates, they're all terrible. But no, date comparisons in the engines. And so we've been talking about the new mask and the update from Adobe for CF 2021.
The new
and
Mask of Zorro.
Yep, and how Scott Steinbeck had a regex that he posted, and we shared in last week's show notes for fixing that. But James Moberg has also been reviewing date comparisons because he's been looking at the Lucy syntax notes and how dates are basically compared, etc. So, yeah.
So Charlie pointed out to me that I think I had said something incorrectly on last week's podcast. I don't think he was there live, but he had watched it after the fact. When I was on the online meetup last week, before we got started, he mentioned to me that we had talked about how there's a hot fix for 2021 to be able to change the date behavior. And I think I had incorrectly stated that the hot fix would revert it back to the old behavior, and then you had to opt into the new behavior. But I was wrong about that. It's actually the opposite. Even with the hot fix, you still get the new breaking behavior. The hot fix only gives you the option to opt out of it. So that's a little bit different than I think I had said at one point, which means you can't just throw the hot fix on and be like, there, I'm done. You have to throw the hot fix on and add the JVM arg, and then the planets will align, and you'll be able to get the old behavior back. So apologies if I led people astray on that. Charlie put me back on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good point. We did obviously share the little note, and Charlie's blog post has lots of details, so if you read along, you'll be good. Yeah, and Charlie just confirmed in the chat, yes, by adding the JVM arg along with dropping in the jar. There you go. Thanks, Charlie. So, back to what James Moberg was talking about with the date comparisons. He discovered that some Adobe ColdFusion inconsistencies where true comparisons are false depending on the version used. And he actually has a gist for this. I'm going to pull up the share screen for those watching at home. And so he has a bit of code here, so we're just going to run it. But apparently, depending on the version you run, these date comparisons may show up true or false depending on the version. So on TryCF, you'll get true if you're running ColdFusion 2016, Lucy 5, 4.5, or Raylo. But if you're running, you'll get a false if running ColdFusion 10, 11, 18, or 2021. CF10 doesn't support ISO dates. So basically, 1/2/1999 is, or past date time, different results. And then with CF Fiddle, obviously we only have 16, 20, and 18. You get true with 16 or 20, but false when 2018. So I don't know why TryCF's 2020 shows false here, but it shows true on CF Fiddle, unless they're running different versions.
Yeah, I wonder if they're in a different update level. Huh.
Yeah, so just some weird inconsistencies. Like asking, is this date the same as this? And I always wonder if it's something to do with the, the ISO, well, not ISO, even just the locality too. Like, is this 1st of January, or is
always been? Well, that's a good question. If the locality could affect it, date parsing has always sort of been, I don't want to say an Achilles heel, but just like a really annoying part of ColdFusion, because it always has these little like crazy wacko edge cases that you didn't see coming. And I think it's because it tries to be so darn helpful. ColdFusion and whatever Java libraries it will use will just kind of bend over backwards to parse just anything imaginable into a date.
Isn't 24 a date? It's like some
maybe.
random integer that become dates too. And
and it's trying to be helpful by supporting all these formats, but it's sort of to the point where like I don't really even know of like a comprehensive documentation that really covers every possible thing that ColdFusion will turn into a date. I'm not really aware of that. I know things that James Moberg has done where they find these edge cases. And of course, Adobe ColdFusion being closed source is not even a way to go look at that code and see what it does publicly. But yeah, so you end up with these crazy behaviors where out of the blue, like a decimal or an integer value, like you said, is like, oh, that's a date in ColdFusion.
Yeah, because some weird edge case where someone says, well, if I'm doing like AM and PM or...
Yeah. Somewhere, somebody said, well, I think that should be a date. And ColdFusion's like, okay, we'll put on the code for that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So, and the weird thing is, too, if you do it is date and is past date, do the past date time, that's not always exactly the same. And there's some weird edge cases that
I'm sure they use some different libraries behind the snes that probably don't have all the same edge cases in place.
They're just slightly different, I've found. And
It would be
well, it
interesting
depends on
to
the
try to
version
document. It'd be interesting to try to get a document that covered all of the rules of what can be considered a date. I'm really curious if that exists somewhere. I've never come across it. Maybe it's buried somewhere in the Adobe docs. I bet you $1 Lucy doesn't have anything like that. Lucy's probably just implemented whatever random edge cases have been shoved into the Lucy ticket tracker over the years. Adobe does this. Okay, we'll add that one in.
Yeah. Well, for most of them, unless they think it's stupid, right? Usually they follow compatibility to the point of, no, that's stupid.
Yeah, Lucy will follow Adobe's lead unless they think it's exceedingly stupid, and they're like, no, we're not doing that one.
Yeah, which is good.
I mean, and on that note, I mean, you and I have hit some things where Lucy said, no, we're not doing that, and that was if you don't use an explicit date function, but in Adobe ColdFusion you have like an if statement, and you say if, and you compare two strings as a date, or a date and a string, Adobe ColdFusion will try to parse those strings into dates to do a date comparison if it can. Lucy will not. It will not auto-parse strings into dates just to see if by chance these are a date. If it's a string, it'll be like, all right, I'm doing a string comparison, which can be tricky because some dates can, like a greater than, less than kind of comparison, may look like it's working correctly just because the strings happen to sort in that direction, but it won't be a true date comparison. And you and I have had to write code check rules and go through CodeSpaces converting to Lucy and change all of those into proper like date diff. So you have to tell Lucy, no, this is a date. But I mean, Lucy's reason on that wasn't because it was, quote, stupid. It was, well, it's performance. You know, there's a lot of overhead and checking every single string you ever come across in a comparison to say, hey, is this string a date? So it's understandable, but yeah, that can definitely bite you when you're moving between engines.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Just a reminder that, yeah, check your dates. And yeah, it would be nice to have a big test suite with all the possible different date things that we could see and run on different engines. I guess it'd be interesting to see what flew. As Charlie said, we could probably do something like that, but even if there were, all those variations would be mind-bending, and that's true. But I wonder if we did attack it from like a test perspective, we could run the test in a matrix and see what passes and fails, and could be interesting. But then of course you still have to compare them all. But I don't know, interesting. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring it to everyone's attention because that seemed like a pretty basic one. But James, if you're listening, do you want to check and see if it is a month-day thing where it's, is it January 2nd or is it February 1st? Because obviously English dates, American dates, etc. That's always the first thing I check with dates. Okay, so next up, a little bit of other side news here. So we've got a blog post from Jason Steinshouer, talking about CFML development with GitHub's CodeSpaces. So it's a pretty good looking blog post talking about this feature GitHub announced a while back about their beta of CodeSpaces, and basically what it lets you do is sort of get up and running with everything you need for working on a project all inside your browser. And so he's walked through the process of getting it set up with ColdFusion. It uses containers. It has a code editor. Basically, it's VS Code editor right inside the environment for you. But it's pretty cool. So we talked about trying to get support for ColdBox for this. So if somebody wants to help with ColdBox or another one of our open source projects, instead of having to like install all the dependencies and do everything on their local machine and everything, they could theoretically get it started up with CodeSpaces in their browser, make the changes, run the tests, and then commit the code, all without having to do anything other than a browser. They wouldn't even have to install CommandBox, blasphemy as it is. They could do that. So
that's pretty cool. Do you remember when the Cloud9 site, I think it was called, had came out?
Yep, AWS bought them, so that's part of AWS now. Yep.
Because there had been a bit of a push to try to figure out how to get CFML on there, but unfortunately it kind of boiled down to it would take someone had to sit down and spend time on it, and there weren't enough people that actually cared enough to do it. I had looked into it, but I didn't have the time to spend on it, and it had never really gone anywhere. I like the fact that it sounds like it's kind of centering around Docker a bit more, which I think makes it easier in that regard. I think when Cloud9 first came out, I don't think Docker was really in the picture as much. I'm trying to remember when that was.
No, yeah, I remember it for quite a while ago.
Because it used Atom, I believe, as the editor.
Yeah. I know we did that at our JavaScript group. We would set up stuff in there for people to try things out and whatnot. And it was a good little tool, and like I said, I think that's why AWS includes it now into some of their tools. I believe. Maybe someone can correct me. But yeah, it's it's a pretty nice little tool. And this one's based off it, but VS Code. The good thing about that is it has the editor can be used inside of a browser. You can use themes and extensions and all that right inside your browser. So I think they're tapping into that. And it's currently free for beta, but limited to just 2 instances. It looks like it's going to be a paid option, but I know they have some open source options too. So I know that we've talked about looking to this more, but it's pretty cool. So it might be something you need to pay for, but I know a lot of people are working towards like AWS workstations and a lot of the sort of thin client stuff where all the work is done on a VM somewhere else. So this is basically all done in your browser with a Docker VM hidden off sort of scene. So it's kind of interesting. So I thought it was a good one to check out, and it deserves a little more spotlight than just our traditional blog post there. So I know
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And thanks a lot, Jason, if you're listening to this, for putting some effort into this. I'm sitting here trying to decide what it would take to get this as like an out of the box option you can choose, or if that's actually offered with CodeSpaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just add a couple of sites to your sorry, not a couple of sites. Add a couple of pages configuration to your repo essentially, and then anyone who wants to use it can use it. So you put in your default configuration, and it starts up. So, but that was from the presentations I saw. I haven't seen all the GitHub Universe things yet. They talked about CodeSpace a little bit. I wanted to try and watch a session or two on that. So I might have to check out the recordings and find out more. But
keep an eye on that.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks, Jason. And in case you missed it, Mr. Brad Wood over there did a session last week with Charlie. You want to tell us a little more about how that went? And
no, if you didn't listen to it live, then that's on you, man.
Or you can go watch the YouTube recording because we have the link for that.
You ruined it. It's a YouTube recording.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was on the ColdFusion Online Meetup. My topic was using CommandBox CLI to manage all your servers. So it was sort of a soft introduction to the CLI that hopefully doesn't suck as much as other CLIs. How to use it and how to use it to manage all your servers. Lucy servers, Adobe servers. We covered CFconfig, host updater, .env, handful of things. And so yeah, Charlie has that meeting recorded. If you want access to the slides I used are on SlideShare because I've done this presentation before, but if you ping me on Twitter or Slack, I can also make sure you get a link to the slides as well. Charlie said meetup.com doesn't really have a great mechanism for posting those slides, so I can help you find them if you'd like.
You maybe put them in the YouTube link if you give it to him.
Charlie had actually suggested that to me, and I hadn't done it yet, which was adding a comment to the YouTube video. Because you're right, this.
Okay.
In fact, why don't I just do that now while I'm thinking about it?
Yep. Well, the iron is hot. Okay. And then just another couple of in case you missed it. Advent of Code 2020 is still going on at adventofcode.com/2020. So some cool little puzzles there. It's a little festive holiday season. Do some puzzles in a multitude of languages any way you want. And the CFML Slack channel has a puzzles, I believe, channel set up for that. So if you want to see other people and see how they're solving it and what they're solving it in, look at it. Yeah, and most of them are made to be pretty simple for the first one of the day, and then a little more complicated for the second one of the day. And there's basically one a day until Christmas, I believe, or two a day until Christmas. So you can go back and catch up. And then also we have a blog post, a forum post about Sentry.io, trying to get CFML listed in Sentry.io in the right place with a little icon and all that. So we have a link in the show notes. So go vote on that if you haven't already, and hopefully we can make some noise.
I don't think anybody replied, because I commented on that ticket during our show last week. Yeah, unfortunately, nobody else chimed in anymore.
So please go do that. It does help if we have a little noise going on there. Okay, so next up, our CFCasts update. So as I mentioned in our sponsor section, CFCasts has some great content out this week. So right now, 12 modules of ForgeBox. Currently we have 2 videos already, and there's going to be 1 a day released until Christmas. So we're going to have 12 amazing modules from ForgeBox listed 1 a day. So that's one of the series going on right now and has a few videos out. And the ColdBox Zero to Hero workshop has 6 videos posted already. Sorry, 20 videos posted already, 6 hands-on with step-by-step instructions. And then we're releasing those every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and it's going to go all the way until 2021. So we've got stuff till the end of the month. I think the first of, I think even into the first of the new year. So pretty cool. Let me share screen here. So you can see there's a lot of content here. So we got hands-on information as well. So a lot of good content in there. And then if we go to the CFCasts homepage, you'll see the 12 modules of ForgeBox Christmas as well. And the third one just been published this morning, so there's now 3. So go check those out. And like I said, the other 9 will be coming very soon.
And are those free content, or do you need to be a subscriber of CFCast to see those?
So the 12 modules of ForgeBox Christmas are free. The ColdBox Zero to Hero workshop is paid. You can either just purchase the training workshop by itself, or you can become a subscriber, and if you're a subscriber, you get access to that as well. So, but we do try and give you a mix of free and paid content, and so sign up is easy. Just need an email address basically, and then get into the system and watch those videos.
Excellent.
Okay, up next is conferences and training. So the 3-week AWS reInvent conference is almost over. I can't believe it's still another week's worth of content. So Amazon's premium conference is virtual, it's free, and it's into the 3rd week now. A lot of the sessions are pre-recorded, available on demand. So if you've missed any, you can go look at those. A lot of great content there from a great number of community members and AWS engineers as well. So you can get that at reevent.awsevents.com. And again, this is usually a high profile, high paid conference. So make the most of it during these COVID times and get some good homeschool. Also want to remind you the Adobe ColdFusion Certification is online. It's available still on the introductory offer. So you can, I don't know when that's
introductory offer that just keeps introducing.
Yep, so you can go register for that at adobe.com/product/ColdFusionFamily/certificate. Link is in the show notes and on the chat if you want to find out more about it. And it's got 50 plus videos. I think it's about 10 to 15 hours of content, and there's a multiple choice quiz at the end. For those who didn't know, in case you missed it, Github Universe was last week. So I actually watched a few of these episodes, and now all 70 talks over those 3 days are available on demand. So
70 talks in 3 days?
Yeah, they had 4 channels.
That's a veritable 23 and 1/3 talks per day.
Yeah. It's a lot of good content there. A lot of things. But if you go to githubuniverse.com, you can check out all the sessions, watch the videos, and they did break it down to 4 different channels, which is pretty cool too. So they had the play stuff, which is kind of like, Raspberry Pis and things like that, and the dev stuff, more about CodeSpaces, and that's what I really want to go check out, is find out more about these CodeSpaces. They're pretty cool. They had a lot of good features they announced in the keynote too, so if you want to keep up on GitHub and what they're doing, it's definitely worth watching. So all free content available at your fingertips. So also, in case you missed it, Pete from Foundeo had his security training last week. So we haven't heard anything about the training, if it went well, how many people, etc. But there are options if you missed it. There is an on-demand video series available as well. So he has that from a previous year's recording. So that's still available on the site. And I know Pete does this a few times a year now online, and he does it in person when that's possible. But you can always ask him about the next time he plans to do it too, if you're looking at doing that, or by on-demand videos. So I know we love having Pete at our Into the Box conference. So always a great trainer, good presenter. So and just really helpful in the community too. So support your Pete.
Support your local Pete.
Okay. well, that's it for our conferences and training section. So let's get into the blogs, tweets, and videos of the week. So first up, we had one from Will DeBruin. And so he was talking about how Pete saved the day on this one as well, actually. So good timing. So basically, we have some documentation on setting up the search engine friendly SES URLs for the ColdBox router with Nginx, and that works great. You can have a pretty URL like the one here versus the one that has the question mark and everything in the URL. He said though when he tried to switch over to using Apache, the documentation we had didn't work, and so he went through, was trying to get it working, and then Pete jumped in and helped him, and you put him on the right track here. So this, if you guys are using Apache in front of ColdBox and maybe the rules aren't working quite as you expected, this blog post should help you with that. Knowing Will, he's probably already got a pull request in the documentation because he's always contributes back to us here at Order, so we appreciate all that. But it's a good blog post, a good blog post for all that information. So yeah, and again, Pete Freitag, always there to help. So thanks, Pete. Okay, now have you ever tried to implement Okta, Brad?
I have not implemented Okta, but you have worked on a client with me that used Okta. They had an implementation for their single sign-on.
Yep, and that is not an easy thing to get set up. I know we were working on it for another client, and one of our developers is pulling his hair out.
I remember it being complicated just using the existing implementation that client you and I had worked on. I can't imagine how much work it was to actually get it going.
Yep.
Okta's a pretty big company. Like, I usually run into an Okta booth every year at DevNexus when they actually have it in person.
Yep.
So I hear about them regularly.
Yeah. Well, Andy Peterson blogged about how the new Adobe ColdFusion 2021 makes that pretty painless. So, basically, he thinks that the first thing that they decided to do with Adobe 2021 was to basically make sure Okta worked, and he says they did a pretty good job of it. So, this blog post walks you through the configuration, shows you. I really like his blog post, how detailed he is. So he has all screenshots and descriptions of what should go where, and spells it all out. So if you guys are looking at Okta and you're using Adobe, maybe 2021, this has some pretty neat little walkthrough and get an idea of how it might work for you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I know that Adobe's got a lot of cool features like this, and we've got quite a few blog posts about them this week. So
this is nice. Definitely part of no, niche isn't the right word, niche, but I mean this is the enterprise portion of Adobe that you don't get with Lucy. I know I like to love on Lucy a lot, but I don't necessarily expect Lucy will probably ever integrate anything like this. So definitely kudos to Adobe kind of pushing the enterprise stuff that they offer, which in my opinion I think can justify the price that they have these integrations that come out of the box. We have open source free Lucy, but they're not really looking at doing enterprise integrations like SAML. So
yeah.
Good on Adobe for that. I'm glad to see them adding value there. That when they add something, you're like, it's been in PHP for 7 years. Then it's not like I'm going to pay money for that. But I think those enterprise integrations are really sort of a sweet spot of like companies will pay money to save themselves, a lot of development in that area.
Yeah, we have a couple of blog posts about that soon. We'll see some more of the value there.
Yeah, and Charlie just clarified in the chat. When I say enterprise, I don't mean the enterprise edition. I just mean an enterprise class feature. As Charlie just pointed out, you can still use what you were showing in a standard edition of ColdFusion, which is a very good thing to note.
Yep, for sure. Okay, let's jump into Ben Adele's blog post on using Java's concurrent queues for asynchronous programming in Lucy CFML. So this one started a little tweet thread here, so we'll show that in a minute too. But he's basically talking about asynchronous programming and how he's kind of been fascinated with it lately. And he did mention there's a healthy tension between complexity, performance, stability, and availability. And I thought that was good to remind yourself too, because you can get more performance using threads and asynchronous programming, but it does get a little more complex. So he was talking about these concurrent queues in Java, and basically how that uses locking and everything. And of course, we can do it in ColdFusion, and there has been occasions where people have done it in ColdFusion. We'll talk about that in a minute too. So he was basically walking through his process. And I know I always say this, but I really like Ben's process. Like he really does break things down. And if you're wanting to understand it, and that's his goal with all these blog posts, is to get a better understanding of the language and not just use something blindly. And so, he creates abstract classes and subclasses, and uses some good service objects that extend other objects. And so he walks through it. I'm not going to go through it because obviously there's a lot of details in here, but a really good blog post. And then, as I mentioned, there was some tweets. And, of course, you responded, and a few others, because he had the right keyword in that tweet.
Yep, one of the ones I saw.
Yep. And so, this is his blog post, and, of course, you're like, dude, you've got to check out the Async Manager in ColdBox. So, yeah. So, obviously, asynchronous program is pretty important to us at Audis with ColdBox and everything. And so, Luis has done a ton of work with that, right? With
CB Futures, as he calls it.
Yep.
But yeah, a lot of we're using it all over the ColdBox core now. For instance, like the console or the file loggers in ColdBox. Instead of just writing directly to a file and the request waiting for that write to happen, for a while we used to just kind of spin off the write inside of a thread, but you would still have the issue of 1,000 logs being 1,000 times the file gets opened and closed. Now ColdBox uses the async manager, which is just a wrapper around all the great Java, the JDK functionality that Ben's been poking at. And, the file appender in ColdBox just spins up like a daemon thread that just runs as a little, thing in the background. And then stuff gets chucked into an internal queue and it all just gets like batched out to the file. So it's really optimized. But yeah, I was telling Ben, I was like, dude, like you're right. This is really cool. But like, look at some of the stuff. Like we've already done a bunch of this work. And it's all inside of the async manager. And a note on this, if you're thinking, gosh, I don't use ColdBox, it's important to note that the async manager stuff in ColdBox 6 is part of the core libraries that also are part of Wirebox, Logbox, and Cachebox. So even if you just drop like Wirebox into a legacy app or a Framework 1 app or a non-ColdBox app, you get the full async manager. You don't have to be full-on ColdBox MVC to use it. So don't let that dissuade you if you're like, yeah, we don't use the ColdBox framework. If you want to play around with all of Luis's async manager goodness, you can just drop in Wirebox or something, which is a super tiny library and it's still baked in there. Anyway,
that's pretty cool. I didn't think about that. So yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Ben's right. This stuff is just fun to play with, and it's amazing the kind of performance you can get when you start messing with some of the stuff. I mean, I get so much mileage just out of the Lucy, array each, and you can just say async or parallel equals true, and it gives you a little thread pool of 20 threads. I used that like twice this last week in some client work where I needed to loop over like 1,000 things and do something, and I'm like, it takes like 10 seconds. I'm like, wait a minute, I can async this. It takes a second. You're like, yes, quick win,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Asynchronous stuff is just fun. But like Ben said, I mean, it can always complicate stuff. All of a sudden you have to worry about thread safety and locking. So,
yep, and that's why it's kind of nice to have a library that does that for you and takes some of it out of it. And then Pixelate also said they've been doing it for a while, and they have a CF concurrency or CF concurrent.
Yeah, Dom Watson has done a ton of stuff, and in fact, Dom Watson's stuff actually predates Luis's async manager. I just don't know if it's as reusable. But they have some really cool concurrent stuff. The Preside CMS basically rewrote their own like task scheduler inside of their CMS because they didn't want to use the one that was built into Lucy. They wanted to do a little bit better and more configurable. And it uses the concurrent classes in Java to have these like daemon threads that run. It's pretty impressive what Dom's done there as well.
Yeah, I think Luis talked with Dom too when he was doing some of the async manager and touching base because we know we'd seen some of that stuff. So. But yeah, but pretty cool. And Ben has a few more asynchronous related blog posts coming up here too.
Oh yeah.
And of course, we always tell you the latest first, so a lot of times we give it to you in reverse order, so that's why it's a little weird. I've thought about changing it sometimes, but it's like, no, we want to show the most recent news first. But in a blog series, it's backwards. So, but Andy has another blog post, so 0 to serverless in CFML in 20 minutes. He says it was more like 10. So this is pretty cool. So yeah, if you want to get up and running with CFML serverless.
Oh, look, AWS Cloud 9.
Yep, exactly.
We were
I knew I'd
just
seen it
talking
somewhere.
about them.
Yeah, so if you're setting up a Lambda or whatever, I think the Cloud9 is the editor is what you use. But so yeah, he's been working, and 20 minutes into this 90-minute session by Paul Cluxio of Amazon Web Services, he's watching CFML run on his AWS. He says basically watched the video for 20 minutes, but took him less than 10 to get up and running. So this little blog post will walk you through that. So you set up your name and environment. You set up your environment settings here. Yep, and there's a Cloud9 basically for it.
It's combining
So
Fuseless with it. Yeah, nice.
So he shows you all the different stuff. But yeah, Fuseless. Thanks again to Pete. Busy man today.
I was talking to Pete about Fuseless the other day. Did I talk to you, Gavin, about that announcement that came out a few weeks back? I forget if we talked about it on here or not. The AWS Lambda stuff is improving this, and I only sort of vaguely understand how it all works to begin with, but there was some announcements that they were improving support to be able to use like an entire Docker container up to like 10 gigs or something pretty huge to be able to deploy on Lambda.
Yeah, and we were talking about what we could do with Minibox now.
Exactly, yeah, because that was always one of the sort of big constraints of Lambda is you're only allowed like a couple hundred megs or something, and it's really hard to package a CF engine and Java and everything inside of that. In Fuseless, kind of has a very lightweight version of Lucy that it uses. But yeah, there was really kind of opened up some interesting ideas of being able to take the Minibox image that Pete Freitag has, which is CommandBox, the Azul JDK, if I recall, and it's like 77 megs for the entire thing. Be able to somehow deploy that to Lambda. I'd love to play with that. It's just, unfortunately, right now it's on the bucket of things that takes a little bit more time than I have free time sitting around.
Yeah, for sure. And so
if
that
you want to pay me to play with that, you call up Ortis.
yeah, and that video by Paul is on the Mid-Michigan ColdFusion user group. And so that blog post has links to that. Also has information about Fuseless and a lot of the other tools inside of that too. So and so that's where Charlie's saying at AWS reInvent, they announced they'll accept use of containers and any for lambdas and serverless. So so that'll
that's
be
pretty
cool.
awesome. I mean, and we're already doing this with some of our clients, like I've talked about, where I wrap up a CommandBox task runner inside of a Minibox container, and right now we just use Docker Swarm. We can just chuck it out there as like a scheduled task. Spins up the container, runs the CommandBox task runner, database calls, HTTP, whatever, spins down. I love the idea of being able to take that concept and just do it on Lambda, something that just spins up out there. I think the big question, of course, is like startup times and all that nonsense. But
yeah, I know that they stay alive for so long, but still.
Yeah, that's what Pete and I had actually been talking about, was just how long do they stay alive? Because if you had a job that you wanted to run regularly enough that the container would always stay running, you only get charged for when something comes in to run. You don't get charged when it's sitting there idle. That could actually work out pretty well. Otherwise, you have about a 10 to 15 second, depending on the CPU, startup time. If you want to spin up like a full CommandBox task runner, so maybe a little bit faster. It just depends, but
yeah.
Anyway, I totally want to play with all that. I'm excited about it. I just don't have the free time.
Yeah. I know. Charlie said that you'll have to add some code, whatever's running the container, to leverage the Lambda API, whatever. So not simple as
right. Yeah,
hope,
and
still.
I've read into quite a bit of the docs, Charlie. That's actually what Pete and I were talking about. Unfortunately, the more their docs I read on the Lambda API, like the more questions came up. Like, well, what the heck? How does this work? How does this work? How does this work? But yeah, I am aware of the Lambda API, and it seems like it's simple. But then it's like, well, geez, every time I think it's simple, I find another page of like complications. And I'm like, oh, well, I have to think about that as well. But
yeah, so definitely you want to play and figure it out for sure. So
which is why we need a client to come hire Ortis to pay me to play with this, and then I will release it as open source.
Yeah, obviously, but
obviously. All right, moving on.
Yep. So as I mentioned, there's a couple more from Ben, and so I'll do them in order because they're right next to each other. So the first one is it's experimenting with tail recursion using CF Thread and Lucy. So historically,
I saw him blog this, and I did not actually read it.
So historically, said Adobe ColdFusion, CF threads cannot spawn more threads, but in Lucy you can have deeply nested CF thread tags. So
Oh yeah, and I've always hated that limitation because that always caused problems for us in ColdBox land because we wanted to have like generic file appenders that just kick off stuff in a thread. And then all of a sudden you try to log something from inside of a thread, and Adobe ColdFusion was like, "You can't do that." And Lucy's always like, "Yeah, sure, why not?
yeah,
Of course you can do it."
yeah. And so this one here, this is where he starts experimenting with the tail recursion. And so basically, the thread starts, and at the end of it, you sort of, you're going to start another thread. And so basically, the 10th thread starts the 9th, starts the 8th, starts the 7th, and so it just spins out, and so you can just keep going down. And so, yeah, you can call, I don't know how many, but basically you can continue going through. So in his one here, he was just doing a reduction with it, a simple, option. But as he mentions, CF threads are not free, so there's a couple of quirks in the processing where sometimes when you spawn them, I know there was some issues where it was basically cloning the overheads. It was doing some request cloning, etc. So hopefully they're fixing them in the new version.
Lucy's done a handful of changes recently that apply to the sort of overhead that happens every time a thread gets copied. I don't know much about how Adobe ColdFusion handles it, but inside of Lucy, the entire page context gets cloned from the original, for whatever the calling page or thread is, gets cloned an additional time for the next thread. So there's, a separation. Because all of your variable scopes, your request scopes, or even your local scopes are all part of that page context. But you also have things like the form scope, and the page context in Lucy also wraps the HTTP servlet request, which is where all the request body and stuff is. So yeah, I know that Lucy had some overhead issues in the past where if you had a very large incoming request and you spawned a bunch of threads, there was a lot of churn on that.
Yeah, and I know a big one a while ago was a file upload. So if you had a file upload and then did some threading in the same request, it would spawn the file upload essentially.
Because that was all baked inside of that HTTP request object, which was inside of the page context, and it would kick off the parsing of some of that every time, which was
pretty crazy.
where the overhead came in.
Yeah, but then
sorry, I just want to say what can make it extra tricky is being able to profile this stuff. I love the Fusion Reactor profiler, right? I use it all the stinking time. But as soon as you have a page that fires off like a ton of CF threads, which maybe in turn fire more CF threads, you start to lose those pretty quick. And Fusion Reactor tries really hard to track that stuff and show it to you, but all of a sudden, what happened over the course of my request is like what happened over the course of like these 100 threads that were all like vaguely related. So it gets tricky to profile the performance when you get into threading as well, which is just, it's a complicated area. There's not good solutions to it.
Like Ben said, if you want performance, sometimes you got to give up something else and that little availability, etc. So
yeah.
So
I love this threading stuff. I've said for a while that I really thought like one of the next, I don't want to call it a frontier because it's so dumb, but one of the things that I always thought ColdFusion developers never really took advantage of is the amazing threading capabilities of the JVM. It's like one of the most awesome things about it, and all we had was this dinky like CF thread tag, and maybe Mark Mandel's little concurrent library he used to have years ago, and it's like we never had like really good threading tools. So
yeah,
that's why I love this stuff so much, because there's so much power in the JVM that I think ColdFusion developers oftentimes just don't really tap into.
I know. I mean, Ben said that he remembers Mark Escher back in 2010 or 2012
maybe
talking about
maybe that's
all
who
this.
it was who had the concurrent thing. I just said Mark Mandel, but you're right. It might have been Mark Escher.
Yeah, I saw them in the
It was one of those
tweet
two
thread.
Marks that had a concurrent library. What was it?
It might have been. I mean, because Mark Escher was talking about it all, and Ben said it was over his head at the time. That's why he's playing with this stuff. So, anyways, while you're looking that up,
Find that.
the next one, we're looking at recursive nested CF threads by Ben again, but this time he's going to see if he can get around the CF setting request timeout.
It was
So-
Mark Escher.
Okay, cool. So I
Yeah,
was right.
CF concurrent was the name of the library, and it was Mark Escher. So
Okay,
apologies, I said the wrong thing.
it's okay. Too many good marks out there. But yeah, and so this blog post, he was looking at using the tail recursion, but also to see if the request timeout kicked in. And so we looked at before that if the main thread has a request timeout of like say 10 seconds, for example, and the lower ones have a smaller timeout. basically, will they affect each other? And so in this one, what he's doing is he's going to start the first request with a 10-second timeout. Then he's going to start spawning lots of little requests and see if the main page timeout kills the additional threads and the threads of threads of threads of threads. So essentially, if you look at the cool little animated GIF here, you'll see that it starts the thread and then starts spitting them out. Then one gets killed, and the subthreads keep spawning. So it keeps working, even though the main one timed out. The threads don't time out because they're less than the original 10 seconds. Even though each of them spawning another one and spawning another one is taking longer than the original timeout, they can still keep going because their individual ones aren't over that, but collectively they would be.
Anytime you're debugging threading, it's kind of funny watching this animated GIF. You always end up with the console logs because all of a sudden CF dumping to the browser just isn't a pattern that really works anymore, and you end up in the console, which is not a bad thing.
Yep. So, but it was, like I said, interesting threads. Really like it. So thanks, Ben, for sharing all this stuff.
Ben's thread on threads.
Yep, exactly. And then we have a few from the ColdFusion portal this week too. So it looks like some more of the Adobe stuff. And I apologize because I don't recognize the names and don't know how to pronounce them, especially because it only shows the username. I mean, this might be Hannah because it's Hannah 1809. So they're talking about Azure blob storage in CF 2021. So if you're interested in that, some good information there. And then we have a few more later, but we did mention James's tweet already about the date inconsistencies, so we won't show that one again now because we went over it at the start. But yeah, it's important. So we got another one from Ben. Let's get back to that, and then we'll go back to more Adobe 2021 stuff. So this one followed on from his last week's blog fest on the JSON stuff in MySQL. Blogstorm.
Remember,
sorry.
We named it. I think
so. So this was interesting. So basically exploring type coercion and value comparisons in a JSON column. So first he starts off by saying if you have a number one and a string one, MySQL, like ColdFusion, likes to try and coerce them. And one thing he mentioned here, which I want to just highlight, is while MySQL happily coerce values on the fly during comparison, this does have implications. The most critical of this is that type coercion will bypass index selection during query planning, which may result in a full table scan. So just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Makes sense, though. There's a lot of optimization that databases do, which is dependent on knowing the exact data type. And when you might have to go through and massage all the values, all of a sudden it's a lot more difficult to optimize that.
Yep. So that's just something to be aware of. So long story short is here, JSON does care more. So
Who's Jason?
Or JSON. When you're using MySQL functions for JSON, it does care about the type. So if you have an unquoted versus a non-quoted, it will actually give you different results. So there are a couple of hints here. So he uses some extra features. So he sort of walks through it all. But basically you can coerce them yourself, but you have to choose to do so. And then the long story of it is with JSON columns, garbage in, garbage out. So if you're going to store it as a number, store it as a number. Don't store it as a string. Be careful. And obviously, if you're changing a struct in ColdFusion and serializing it, you have to see what that does and then check against that. So it's just something to be aware of. I know a lot of times when you're doing serialization, like JSON, it'll basically turn everything into a string. So you just need to be aware of that. So yeah.
I got a shirt at one of the first Couchbase conferences that said JSON across the front of it. And when I was leaving, I had it on in the airport, and the lady at the counter asked me if my name was Jason. And I was like, what? She's like, your shirt. I'm like, oh, no, never mind. So now whenever I hear Jason, all I can think of is the name Jason.
Yeah. Yeah, and so he did have another side here too. If you do unwrap the JSON values to basically take off the quotes, MySQL will fall back to coercing on the fly, just like normal. So there's a little shorthand to do it for you too. But anyway, so I like his superhero quote: with great flexibility comes great responsibility. When you opt out of the strict schema provided by relational database, it means the onus of enforcement falls upon the developer. You now become the one responsible for data integrity. Proceed with caution. So, I think that's what everybody.
ColdFusion developers, we're used to living on the edge.
Yeah.
What are data types anyway, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people jumped on that NoSQL train until they realized that, oh crap, now it's up to me, and then they came back to relational. That's why I think relational seemed to surge back after a while.
Yeah, maybe. The whole, and we talked about this before, the whole like everyone's going to throw away their relational database and jump on NoSQL never really happened. Varchar, everything. But I have enjoyed finding some recent really good uses for JSON documents and Couchbase, but it's always been as sort of like a denormalized cache of data that's really hot that I'm working with. That's all just a copy of something in SQL Server, where I can pull things out that are live and deal with them. So it's ended up as like a both side by side where it makes sense, not throw away your relational databases, use JSON, which makes a heck of a lot more sense. I don't think anybody ever really thought we'd completely throw away relational databases. And I think the people that tried, like NPM, wound up back on a relational database, because they were like, yeah, it kind of works better that way.
Yeah, and especially like you say, once relational threw in a couple of JSON blob type fields and gave you some functions, a lot of people say, I guess I don't need it that much after all.
Well, yeah, it is kind of funny how the NoSQL solutions have added in more features from the relational database world, indexing and tying, joining things together. And then the relational world has added in some more JSON support, and they've kind of like moved towards each other a bit.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see where that ends up.
Yeah, natural evolution, right? So
I'll tell my grandkids, back when I was young, NoSQL and relational were two different servers.
Yeah. And just an FYI, Brad, from Charlie to Fusion Reactor 8.5 did add support for better direct monitoring of threads, CF threads.
I saw that.
Okay.
I saw that. You know what they don't have support for is monitoring Couchbase SDK calls. I thought of that today while profiling some code. They did add support for monitoring the Elasticsearch client, which I was super thankful for.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's go jump to a few more of the ColdFusion portal blog posts. We have an AWS S3 storage with ColdFusion 2021. So this talks a little bit more about using that. So again, these are pretty thorough, detailed
blog posts. How's this different from the blob storage one?
Well, the blob is actually in the Azure, so that was a little different. This is the Amazon S3, so
it's kind of the same thing. It's just this is S3 and the other one was blob storage. All right, fair enough.
And we also talk about the iterator support in the ColdFusion 2021. So, I mean, I've used iterators before back in the old Java days and everything, but that's kind of interesting. I don't know. Do you think we'll have a big use of iterators once 2021 is more prevalent?
I don't typically use iterators even in Java code, but I think it's kind of powerful in that you can take a ColdFusion component, add some special methods that look sort of Python-y with all the underscores, and then that sort of adds a behavior on the fly to be able to iterate over it. I like the idea. I don't know that I typically represent a collection of things inside of a component, but I could totally imagine a scenario in which I would. So,
I thought it was interesting. It's, again, another language support feature that is common in other languages, and
I don't know how I feel about the underscores, but whatever. There's not a lot of reserved method names in ColdFusion. You have a init, which is meaningful. You have onMissing method, which is meaningful. Now, frameworks like ColdBox had a bunch of sort of conventions, on error, pre-handler, post-handler kind of stuff.
Yep.
I know that they're trying to avoid, overlapping existing method names. But anyway, I don't know. It's just the naming, but consistency annoys me when it's not there. But the idea I like. And one of the examples right here is a component that returns a query and then, gives you the ability to iterate over it. I'm just trying to check. I was vaguely aware of this, but I haven't really poked at it much. Does this allow your CFC to be iterated by Java as well if I was to call a Java library that expected an iterator?
I have no clue. Charlie?
I haven't had a chance to play with this. I know that that Lucy had some support for some iterator kind of stuff as well in components, but as typically happens, I don't think there's a shred of documentation on it. So you'd have to like get lucky and find some post and discourse where it had gotten discussed.
Yeah.
Because I could especially see this being useful if you had the ability to pass a ColdFusion, a CFC instance, to a Java library that anticipated an iterator, but it would actually need to, implement something most likely. But
Yeah.
anyway, maybe I'll have a chance to play with this because
Yeah,
I
mean,
like this.
I would be surprised if that happened, but I know they did a lot of work with the Java interop, but I don't know if the iterator is part of it or not. So
yeah, the Java interop was good. They didn't follow Lucy's lead, but I didn't necessarily like everything Lucy had done, and that's all in Lucy 6 unreleased. So
yeah,
I can't blame Adobe for not following something that Lucy itself hasn't even really released. So
yeah. But if you are wanting to get up and running with ColdFusion 2021, and you have to do the install instead of using CommandBox, which we try and make it as easy as possible for you. But they have a revamped ColdFusion install experience. So if you want to look at that, reduce size, reduce startup, reduce memory footprint. They've really done a lot of good work on this here. So the install is down to 149 instead of 971 meg. They have the package manager for getting different pieces of the main engine. So it's a nice little write-up here talking about all the different pieces and how to install different pieces. So a nice blog post if you guys are wanting to look at that.
to be clear, you can use CommandBox, however, to run Adobe 2021.
Yes, you can. But some people can't run CommandBox, so they want to run it in a traditional format. So
Right. It just sounded like you said that you couldn't use CommandBox. Maybe
No,
you
I'm
said
saying-
if you can't.
yeah, if you can't, or in addition to, or if you don't want to. Yeah.
If you can't use CommandBox, you should just use it anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, if you're working for the government, CommandBox is on the DADMS, I think acronym, for the Department of Defense approved software list. So CommandBox is approved for Department of Defense projects for the U.S. government. Just throwing that out there if that helps you.
Yep, and Charlie wanted to say real quick too that in that blog post it said the GUI installer was dropped. It wasn't dropped. It's you can look in the comments and you can find more about it. But they just changed the install process to make it easier without the GUI. If you'd like to do that, so
That's good. I like
Always.
focus on the non-GUI installers for automation. That's a good.
yeah, for
Good
sure.
change.
But they left it there for those who need the GUI still. So okay, another one from Ben talking about some extra MySQL features because they're in the process of migrating to 5.7 for long-term support. And this one was pretty interesting. I haven't actually done anything with virtual index columns before. And so he was saying, given an example of, you may have something where people has an email address, pretty common problem. And then you may want to do some work, and his marketing people quite often want to know the domain of a user. And so, he talked about how you could do that. So he populates some data, and then he uses some substring to basically get the email domain out of that. And if you're doing a select and you're doing a count, and then you have to group by that to get the count working, it works. It works pretty good. But if you got a big database, that can be pretty expensive. So what he does is he shows you how to actually alter the table and add a column, a virtual column. So the virtual column is generated based on that substring index. And so you can actually add an index for that. So you've made a virtual column and added a database index based on, like it's almost
like an indexed view, but you're not creating a view. You're just adding that on the table itself.
Yep, and it's on a per row, basis. It's just an extra column, so you can just call that column too. So now if you get email domain, it's available. So it's kind of neat. I mean, it makes me think of formulas and Hibernate and stuff like that. Computed type. It's like a computed column essentially.
Yeah, I'm thinking that could be useful. I mean, I was just talking with some client projects about the same sort of idea this week, where we have a table and there's information that comes maybe from that table or from subtables, like the total count of a related relationship, and you denormalize some number in the top table that it's incumbent upon your application to make sure you always recalculate every time the data changes and you update it. This would sort of allow you to do the same thing, but the database itself keeps it up to date. But instead of having like a trigger that captures all the places you need to update, you're just letting the database do it in the same way that it updates indexes. I kind of
Yeah.
like that.
And the other thing he did too is like, since he already has an index, he wanted to compare. So if he wants to use the email like, and then the domain name, it basically skips the index. You'd basically page all 1,000 rows, versus if you actually use the virtual column, it only uses the 5 rows in the explain.
Yeah, as soon as you do a like and you put that % at the beginning, your indexes typically go out the window. It's going to have to just scan it all, regardless.
And
So
he could have used the substring index piece there instead of using the like, but as soon as he does that, it's smart enough to go use the virtual column he made. So that's why you have to use the percentage to show the difference. So the query optimizers are pretty smart these days. So if there is something you can use, it'll use it. So even if you write something kind of, like you're using the email column, when there is an email domain column, it'll be smart enough to go use the email domain when needed. So. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I hadn't actually messed with them, but now I'm kind of curious what else I can do with them.
yeah, I was completely unaware of this feature. That's pretty cool. This is the kind of stuff I expect like SQL Server or Oracle to have, but I don't typically see in MySQL. So,
Yeah.
and what's crazy is that he's on MySQL 5.7, but the latest version of MySQL is 8, I believe, right?
Yep, but 5.7 still has long-term support for a while, and that's why they're switching over to that. So,
It's just
but yeah,
crazy.
8 has some issues. I know Luis had some issues trying to get it running. It was some project he was trying to run some MySQL 8 stuff and had some fun. So I don't know if the drivers on it, the new drivers work, but maybe they don't work for certain things.
I know
that
Luis had issues getting Hibernate and Lucy to behave with the latest version of the MySQL JDBC drivers.
that's because we think the Hibernate version that it was running on doesn't support the new drivers or something like that, right?
Lucy is on a really old version of Hibernate, so it starts to get a little dicey. How long is that going to keep working?
So, yeah. Use quick. There we go.
Yeah, well.
Yep. Well, we have a couple more blog posts from the ColdFusion Adobe portal. So the old school switch case is now dynamic. How many times has this bitten us?
Actually, not that often for me, but I mean, I'm aware of a limitation.
Yeah. So now you can throw in, basically expressions. Before it used to be a lot more.
The value of your case statements had to just be static values. They couldn't be expressions.
Yeah. You couldn't be functions or anything either. Now you can use a function to figure stuff out.
That's nice. I'm glad to see these sort of crazy off the wall. I mean, there's an iffy in here that instantly evaluated function expression.
Yeah.
In the past, I would have complained that Adobe only halfway implemented it and they just did basic variables but not anything. But they literally will evaluate any flipping expression, it looks like, which is fantastic. I love to see that level of.
I think that is really good because it's bitten me a couple of times where I wanted to have it look up something, maybe depending on your permissions, it'll look up something and only make certain case statements available or whatever, and it just wouldn't do it. So. And then,
that's pretty cool. I never understood why that limitation was put in place. My guess was always just because Java had the same limitation, but I don't know if that's really true. I mean, you would think maybe the compiled bytecode needed to have a limitation, but I mean, a case statement can still probably compile down to just a basic if statement.
Yeah.
I don't know why that limitation was there, but.
Yep. And talking about queues, we have another blog post on the ColdFusion portal. This one's actually part 2, so there's another one here previously linked as well. So understanding simple queue service through CFML. And so
SQS.
Yep, SQS service. So if you want to use their simple queue service, Amazon has a good service there, and then this is how the new Adobe ColdFusion Cloud piece ties into it. So
I have yet to use any of the sort of queues as a service. I've worked with a couple clients that moved from not Rabbit, what's the other one, ActiveMQ, to actually I think it was might have been SQS. But anyway, ironically, in some of those instances, they got bit with the pricing model of the hosted queue stuff. They love the sort of always on, infrastructure. But then based on the number of messages they were sending, it actually like added up and got really expensive. Whereas their own little VM running ActiveMQ was like, they could push as many messages as they wanted.
It's always a tough battle, right? Your own versus a service, because
Yeah.
the service model, the pricing looks good, but you don't know what tier you're going to hit, especially with events. Events scare you when you get some DOS or something, DDoS attack, all of a sudden you're sending a bunch of messages.
Something crazy goes in your site, and all of a sudden there's
like,
100,000 messages, and they were all like 3 cents a piece, and you're like, crap, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's what I guess is what you pay to not have to worry about the server going down.
Yeah. So it stayed up instead, and you got charged for it instead of going down because of the DDoS.
Maybe it would have been better if the site had gone offline.
Exactly. Anyway, so you have a blog post here, how to override single server rule in CommandBox's new server profiles. You want to tell us about that one?
That sounds crazy. Yeah, I wrote this because it was a functionality that I was completely aware of, but it occurred to me that I hadn't documented it, and there's probably a little chance of someone just coming across it. So CommandBox 5.2 has a whole new server profile feature, which is like development and production are the two main profiles right now, and it defaults to production. So CommandBox 5.2 is secure by default. It will block your web administrator by default, which could be annoying, but you can turn it off. It will block access to like server.json, box.json, any files starting with a period. There's all this crap that we block by default now. And so there's some individual sort of high-level settings you can turn on and off. Like, okay, open up the administrator, or okay, stop blocking all the sensitive files. But I had a client who had a need where they're like, well, I want you blocking all the secure stuff, but there was just one path required for RDS to work for Adobe ColdFusion that they wanted to just open just that one back up. And so this blog post basically just kind of shows how you can create a single rule in your server.json that will sort of override just one part of the rule. And it all boils down to the fact that the rules are executed in order. So your custom rules go first, and then all the kind of baked-in CommandBox rules execute last. So if there's one path you want to open back up, you can leave the generic settings turned on, block all the stuff that, flash remote and all that nonsense. And then you can just add one single rule at the top that executes first that says, yeah, this path right here is okay. So
Cool.
If you find yourself thinking, CommandBox is blocking just one thing that I don't want it to, this is your answer on how to do it. And I also had a little note on here in debugging server rules. I regularly run across people that I know have been using CommandBox for years that don't know how to start a server with the debug flag or the console flag, which is should be your go-to solution when a server isn't working. So I also have a little thing in there that says, want to know if your server profiles are working and why your request is being blocked, start it with the trace flag and the console flag. All will be made clear unto you.
For sure. Okay. So our last blog of the week, we had quite a few this week, was the one from Jason Steinshouer. CFML development of Github CodeSpaces, which we talked about earlier, so we won't go over that one. So let's jump into the CFML jobs. So getcfmljobs.com has one new post this week looking for a full-time ColdFusion developer in St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Yep. And so that's one job there. And there's a lot of jobs lately. So there's over 56 this half year, but since July 1st, a whole lot of November, December. So if you go to getcfmljobs.com,
ColdFusion 11.
Hopefully
if you interview for these people, you better have some strongly worded questions about why they can explain to you why they're still on ColdFusion 11.
Yeah.
Rake them over the coals, people. I might apply to this just so I can lecture them the fact that they're on.
Why are they unsupported?
11.
Isn't unsupported starting February or something, or is it already unsupported?
ColdFusion 11's been out of support for a couple centuries now.
Yeah, exactly. So you'd say,
they
why are you still running it
6+
unsupported?
years of experience. Be like, you know what people with 6+ years of experience use? A freaking supported version of ColdFusion. That's what they use. But maybe they're hiring you to upgrade their stuff. Let's hope.
Yeah.
Let's hope that'll be your job.
Yep. Otherwise, you'll probably make it your job, especially if Brad's your coach here.
Scott says they're only using that because they couldn't find a license for CF9.
Probably.
It's possible.
Yep. Okay. And then obviously, just a reminder: autosolutions.com/about-us/careers. We have an ongoing position there So we're still looking for a couple more team members. Got a lot of work coming in, hopefully, so we can expand our team some more. So fill out an application there, and well, maybe you can be the new Audis team member.
Quirky personality and an affinity for weird Slack memes is a must. Oh, no, sorry, U.S. time zone is a must.
Yeah.
My bad, I read that wrong.
Okay. ForgeBox Module of the Week. This week, we're going to be looking at one that I thought we'd covered. And so when someone brought it up, I'm like, oh, we've already done that one.
We haven't covered this?
No, I was surprised because
we use this a lot.
We got a bazillion of them in our list, and we haven't covered it yet. So this one is the ColdBox Paginator.
By Senor Javier Quintero.
Yep, we've used this one on quite a few projects. It builds a pagination struct for API responses and custom data tables. It's got a few methods.
I remember the first time I wrote my first pagination logic. And you got to sit there, and you got always like off by one errors. Don't do that. Just use this library.
Yep.
Drop it in.
We were originally using Hibernate for some stuff, and it does some of the work for you. Not all of it, but some of it. So, but this one here, we have it. So we have a generate function that'll generate the pagination struct using total records, the page, and the max rows. You can also generate with results. And so this actually will give you the results, and you can actually generate a result map too. So if you want a result map, you can turn that on true or false, and you can also give it a name for the key as well. So pretty nice there. And there's also simple results, so you can see if there has more, the offset and the page count, and you can generate with the results. There's also a reduce and generate method, and there's also a get page offset. Yep. So some little helpers in there, but
I'm pretty certain we use this in ForgeBox. I know we do.
Yeah, we do, and we use it in several clients.
How meta is that the paginate module is being used to show you the paginate module on ForgeBox? My head just exploded.
Blowing. But yeah, it's a great module. Definitely check that out. Like I said, we use a lot for our API stuff as well. But you can just use it inside your normal site too. So that's our ForgeBox module of the week. And another one I thought we surely must have covered already, but I don't care. But VS Code hint, tip, and trick of the week this week is ESLint.
It lints your S.
Yes. No, but statically analyzes your code to quickly find problems that built into most text editors, and you can use it in your pipeline integration. One thing I do like about it is a lot of the things it finds it can fix. So it's kind of nice, and having this built in, it shows you all the common or the issues that you have. And the good thing about ESLint is you can customize it too, so you can write your own custom passes or write your own rules, so that way you have your own
That's
rules.
Interesting.
And so similar to a lot of the rules we have for formatting and the CFLint, the ESLint allows you to do the same thing. But again, a lot of the benefit of using these types of things is using conventions, so other people have similar conventions, and this way at least your project will match up. So
this may be a stupid question, but does the ES stand for ECMAScript?
Yeah, I believe so.
All right.
So it's not stupid. I had to guess, but I'm pretty sure that's what it does stand for. So again, it has a lot of documentation, release notes, but it's a pretty good system. And if you want to find out more about ESLint, you can go to eslint.org.
Nice. Their builds use Azure pipelines per the little badge on their listing. That's kind of cool. It's the first time I've seen an Azure pipelines badge on a project.
Yeah, I haven't seen one either.
Public pipeline.
Yep. So it's a pretty good tool, and I think it's gained more popularity. There was different linting tools, but it seems to be the biggest JavaScript one out there these days. So that's a good one. Again, I thought we already had that in the list, but it was not. And then finally, Patreon supporters. So again, thanks again to John Wilson, who we've been just saying Synaptrix for months, but I thought, who is that? So it's actually John Wilson.
Who the heck do they think they... Oh, it's John Wilson.
We'll put his name on it. So yeah, so he's been supporting us, and he just upped his support. So I think he went up another level in his Patreon support, and that tipped us over that 60% mark. So thank you, John. I appreciate it, and we want to thank everybody that goes above and beyond, and using their hard-earned dollars to support us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/ordersolutions, you can find out more about our packages. And so we have a few different packages to pick from. And if you don't believe me on how much percent or how many people, it says right here.
I don't believe you!
So we have a little goals at the bottom here. So
okay, I believe you now. You sure showed me.
Yep. So
Gavin, we need to have like something that we promise is going to happen when we hit 100%. Like, I get to throw like a cream pie in your face live on the air, which is going to be really easy since you're so close to me. I don't know. I think we need something to sweeten the deal here. What's going to happen? What embarrassing thing we're going to make Luis do live on a stream?
Why don't we ask our chat? Chat, what should we do when we hit 100%?
Let the community decide. No, the only people who get to vote are people who are Patreon supporters.
Oh, good point.
You want to have a say? Well, sign up at Patreon, and you can tell us what you think.
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of the people in our chat are the people that are on that list there. So, majority of our listeners, the noisy ones at least, right? Patrick Flynn, Scott,
Matthew,
Charlie, Matthew Clemente.
We seriously discussed having a band comprised of like Ortus employees at Into the Box. Of course, Into the Box ended up not having last year, but I do play trumpets, so I mean that's part of a mariachi band.
Yep, we got the singer down because Jorge likes to.
If you've been to an Into the Box, you've heard Jorge belt out whatever those Spanish songs are that apparently everyone knows when they grow up in El Salvador. I mean, he really. I don't know if it's the beer talking or if that's just him, but. We know that Jorge can hold the tune, so no one's worried about that.
Yeah, Happy Box is pretty good, but we thought about trying to spice it up a little more. We got a lot of the members of the Ortus team can play an instrument, so not all mariachi instruments, I must say. But anyway, so let me roll through these names and thank everybody for being our Patreon supporters and getting us over that 60%, another 40% till Brad does something crazy. So thank you Ben Adele, Brett DeLine, Kyle Van Staten, Charlie Earhart, Dali, Dan Card, Daniel Garcia, David Ballinger, Tadia Lesnicki, Don Bellamy, Edgardo Cabezas. Cabezas. See, close.
It's head. Yeah. It's head in Spanish. Cabezas.
Oh, okay. Eric Hoffman, Gary Knight, Giancarlo Gomez, Jan Yannick, Jason Diger, Jeff McLean, Jeremy Adams, Jonas Erickson, Jordan Clark, Joseph Lamory, Kai Koenig, Laxman Tirahadi, Mario Rodriguez, Matthew Darby, Matthew Clemente, Mingo Hagen, Patrick Flynn, Ross Phillips, Scott Steinbeck, Sean Oden, Stephen Klotz, John Wilson, Synaptrix, Yogesh Mishra, Matthew.
So you can say Laxman's last name. That one eats my lunch every time.
Well, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I can say it. Teacher Hadi.
Hey, you know what?
I don't know if it's
having
right.
your name butchered on the podcast is one of the many benefits you pay for as a Patreon supporter.
Yep, we even got a few videos when we first started with people saying, no, that's not how you say my name. You say it this way. So, hey, if we're really wrong, send us a video. We might update it.
If you sign up for Patreon, we'll pronounce your name however you want.
Yep, maybe even the right way.
Maybe.
Okay, well, remember our special episode 84 next week. Our Christmas episode has a special mystery guest.
Special mystery guest.
We're not telling you who it is yet.
Wait. Is it me?
No. I think even better, second special thing is Brad won't be here.
Yeah, that should be enough to tune in.
So Brad won't be here. I won't be here. Eric's going to be hosting a special guest. So tune in and find out who. Maybe we'll give some hints on Twitter later. I guess you have to wait and see. But anyway, you guys have a great week, and Eric and the Mr. Guest will see you next week. Happy holidays.
Bye, guys.
Show notes for this episode can be found at cfmlnews.modernize.io, where you can also subscribe to your favorite podcast player like Spotify or iTunes. We also have the link to YouTube to find more videos just like this. The music used in this podcast is under a royalty-free license from Sound.com and Blue Tree Audio.